were listening to playbacks and stuff, I mumble when I play drums. I'm, I go, I'm going, making these weird noises. There's, certain tracks that you record that are magical. I mean, you mentioned I'm Not in Love, and it was a classic recording situation because we'd already recorded that song for the album original soundtrack, but it was a terrible recording. We recorded it as a shitty bossa nova, and it was awful. But we knew,
very interesting.
But we knew the song, But we knew the song was good, and we kind of shelved it and came back to it.
Oh, hey guys, it's always great to see you here at the podcast, Unlikely Places Pop and Rock Radio. Today's podcast is Kevin Godley of 10cc and Godley and Creme. Man, this episode is just as powerful as the last one I just posted with David Cross. This is something so special. Kevin Godley, thank you so much for coming on. I love 10cc. And shout out to our graphic designer for our thumbnails, Owen Radford, for saying, hey, you got to get Kevin if you can. And thank you, Billy from Glass Onion, for setting this up. Also, Kevin's music video history is insane, so please keep on. About 40 minutes in, they talk about the music videos, and that includes the Real Love Beatles music video and many more. Enjoy, guys. Remember, listen closely and learn something new.
Hi, this is Terry Draper from Class 2.
Hey, this is Paul Chastain.
I'm Brendan O'Hare. I used to be in Teenage Fan Club.
Vic from Star Collector.
Bowen Rat.
Jim Terrell.
Josh Bradley.
Paul Collins of The Nerves, The Breakaways, and The Beat.
I'm Frankie Siragusa, and you're tuning in to Unlikely Places Pop and Rock Radio Show with Vinyl Man Jeb.
Let's just have a chat down here.
You're listening to Mad Wasp Radio.
Hello, everybody. This is your host, Vinyl Man Jeb of the Unlikely Places Pop and Rock Radio podcast. I'm here with Kevin Godley today of 10cc and Godley and Creme. How are you, Kevin?
I'm good, thank you very much. The weather seems to be changing here for the better, so it's spring, flowers are out, so there's a bit of optimism in the air.
It's always a good feeling when the seasons change from all the darker kind of thing to when the sun finally breaks out, and it's like, oh yeah, I really needed that vitamin sun.
Yeah, well, Ireland's a very wet country. They do say about Ireland that it would be a lovely country if it had a roof.
Ah, very leaky? Or a lot of rain, or is it a lot more like just mist and everything? Or
no, it's pretty rainy.
Oh,
but
okay.
When it's summer, which is glorious.
Yeah, I got you. So I asked this question of all my guests that come on the show, no matter where they've been in the music career, kind of keeps everybody on the same, music level here. What got you into music?
What got me into music? Oh, probably the same stuff that gets kids into video games and skateboarding and so on and so forth. When you're young, you kind of the stuff you want to do that makes you feel good and makes you cool. So it wasn't exactly in my blood or my DNA or anything. I just kind of got into it, really. I was in bands when I was very young. I started off playing guitar very badly and eventually discovered that I could play drums slightly better than guitar. But it was just a vibe. It was just for fun, really. And that sort of, I don't know, but the fun became something else. I was planning on a career in graphic design and spent a number of years at art college. But while I was at art college, in the evenings, I'd been sort of bombing around the UK in the back of a Thames van with other people playing gigs. And that was much more exciting than graphic design. And on leaving college, Lol Creme and I went to London for a recording session, and the rest is history.
And that started the legendary band 10cc from there, but there was bands before that as well, correct? Before that whole jump to 10cc, you had two other bands, right?
Yeah, I was in a band with a very early band that Lol sort of was in and out of called the Sabres. That was like a local sort of R&B band. And then I was in a band with Graham Gulman called the Mockingbirds. And we recorded all his hit songs, but we never had a hit with any of them. All the other people that he wrote for did. But the sort of nucleus of what eventually became 10cc was all hovering around in separate little satellites around Manchester. And I suppose it was inevitable that we all came together.
Yeah, it's such an honor to have you on today, of course, as I mentioned before as we started, and just so cool to see how like the process from going from the groups that you were in to become the massive group that was 10cc, but you guys didn't were you guys in success as soon as you started, or was it more of like a climb up with how much? Because I know I'm Not in Love was a big hit and stuff like that, but it wasn't. It seemed like you guys didn't get as much.
That's right. That's right. I mean, our sort of background as a working unit. I don't think we would have gotten anywhere if it wasn't for the fact that we had a refuge in Strawberry Studios in Stockport, just outside Manchester. I think we were the first people to put together a proper professional studio in that neck of the woods, and that was our base. And we kind of learned our chops there as a production unit and a house band. And somebody, I think it was Neil Sedaka, we recorded 2 albums with him, and he suggested that we, write our own material. I mean, it never really occurred to us before, but really, so we did. The first record we put out as 10cc was a hit, strangely enough. It was called Donna, and it got to number 2 in the UK charts. So, but it was kind of a sort of a doo-wop pastiche, and we didn't really have a specific sound. We were just 4 guys messing around in the studio. And I think that's where we felt most at home in the studio. We were kind of boffins in that respect. Live was something that it was a bolt-on situation, and I don't think we really ever put our hearts and souls into playing live, and maybe that's why we weren't as big as we could have been, because we weren't essentially a live outfit that occasionally recorded. We were recording artists that occasionally went out live. It was the other way around. So, we didn't have the full picture going for us.
Yeah, and I'm going to continue right with the 10cc questions here as well, but it's interesting to hear because a lot of bands back then, it was always the live, like you were saying, and a lot of bands, I mean, later on too, like Cheap Trick was way more known for their live, not their studio stuff as much. It was the live, and it feels like that's what I just interviewed Peter Golby of Uriah Heep, and he was telling us the kind of his story with being live and all this, and it's always, you never hear a lot about the studio, but he really wanted to sit down and be in the studio, which is funny because a lot of nowadays it's mostly studio. You're getting a lot of bands that are playing live, but they're getting more success in the studio. It's like times have changed. It's very interesting. Do you have any favorite memories? I mean, this is a big span here of the early years of 10cc, but do you have any favorite memories of your time within 10cc?
Oh gosh, many times. I mean, it was a very short span of time for me and for Lol Creme. I mean, the band carried on after we left, obviously, but we were only with them for 4 years, really, which is a very short space of time. But I have nothing but fond memories of being in a room with 3 other people, and there being no rules, no regulations, no time to start, no time to finish, and no specific way to work. It was a very liberating time, and I think I can't speak for everybody, but for me, those 4 years was kind of like a groundbreaking 4 years for me, because it told me that ideas that I had that I thought were good, a lot of other people could also like them as well. It wasn't just me. So it was a very affirmative time. There's, certain tracks that you record that are magical. I mean, you mentioned I'm Not in Love, and it was a classic recording situation, because we'd already recorded that song for the album original soundtrack, but it was a terrible recording. We recorded it as a shitty bossa nova, and it was awful. But we knew,
very interesting.
But we knew the song, but we knew the song was good, and we kind of shelved it and came back to it later. And we had a meeting, and we were trying to figure out how to approach it. And I remember saying, well, maybe we should try it all with voices. No real instrument, just do it all with voices. And it was like, okay, I think it was an act of desperation, really, because no one could think of anything else. But, sometimes when you just say something and it comes out, there's a reason. And the reason was that it actually worked incredibly well. And it was a series of sessions that everything that we added, every idea we tried on that particular track, worked. And
Oh,
that doesn't
wow.
happen very often.
No, it's very rare, and
That
especially
doesn't
in
happen very
studio
often.
too. Wow.
Yeah, lots of instances like that. But I think that the secret was that we were all four of us, we all came from slightly different backgrounds with slightly different musical tastes. And for those 4 years, they all gelled particularly well. Whatever the equation was, it worked incredibly well. We all complemented each other. And there was no real ego trips going on. It was all about the music. And I think, looking back on it, even though during the sort of 80s and 90s we were considered a guilty pleasure, I think that's turned around now, and I think we're getting what we were due in terms of some respect.
Yeah, I mean, to have a book written called "The Worst Band," is 10cc was such an interesting title for a book. I was so fascinated by that. Like, it's usually like a scary thing, but it's such a fantastic book and really a cool, interesting read. And I haven't finished yet. I still have to get through it, but it's just such a cool idea. And it's just, yeah, you guys are definitely, I see you guys getting your due. I have a lot of friends that are in that power pop era, like, type of music, and they're throwing like, you got to listen to 10cc if you don't know 10cc, and I'm like, I do. And so it's just so much fun to see that that's coming around. And people, I'm young too, I'm only like 22, and one of my friends who's a
Right.
keyboardist in the band that I work with, I'm a guitarist and a singer and a songwriter, and he is so into 10cc. I told him that he does our podcast thumbnails, and he goes, so who you have coming up? I said, you're going to lose it. I said, I got Kevin Godley coming on, and he helped with some of the questions today too as well. So it's been very cool. Shout out to Owen Radford for that help there. But very much fun. We sat down and actually like got ready for this, just because we're both big 10cc heads. I got a few of the vinyl original pressings as well on my shelf. So I think I have the first 4 albums.
Oh,
I believe I
brilliant.
have the self-titled sheet music, original soundtrack, and How Dare You. I know I have How Dare You because it's one of my favorites. So it's very cool.
Okay.
And of course, I got the later stuff like Deceptive Bends and stuff like that as well, which you're not on because you left
Yeah.
right before Deceptive Bends. And it's still very good to hear that
That's
there's
right.
fond memories and not a bad thing. I wanted to ask you personally, how is it like to drum and sing? I mean, a lot of people think Phil Collins, but how is it like for you to be in 10cc and being drumming and singing at the same time?
It's a good question.
Yeah.
I think when I was drumming and singing, I was mostly doing backing vocals. So I never did a lead vocal from the drum stool. So it was okay. I could never tell whether I was in tune or not.
Yeah, you're
It
banging
was,
the sticks down. You're like, am I in tune
I
here?
mean, yeah. I mean, the equipment you had back then was not remotely as sophisticated as there was no in-ear monitors. You had these big wedges behind you, blasting the shit out of your ears. I'm pretty deaf because of it, and that would change every night, obviously, because of the dynamics of a room.
Mhm.
But I didn't actually enjoy singing much while playing drums. There's too many things can go wrong.
Yeah, it's a lot because you got to keep that beat. You're the timekeeper too. It's like it's a that jump there.
Yeah.
I know bands like Andy from Jellyfish did a really good job at trying to keep doing both. It's an insane cool thing to watch. And it's just it's very cool that it makes more sense doing the background vocals while drumming more than the lead vocals, of course.
The problem was, and I had this problem when I was recording drums in the studio, and I didn't notice it at the time, but when we were listening to playbacks and stuff, I mumble when I play drums. I go, I'm going, making these weird noises, which that's coming over on the hi-hat mic. And I was probably doing that when we were playing live as well. So, I would have been happy not to be singing.
Understandably, because it's like you'd just be like, people would probably sample that later on, in like the remix era. Just start sampling your mumbling and be like, this is a brand new song, Oh, that would be that'd be an interesting version.
Matter of taste.
Oh yeah, right. Well, hey, I'm all over the place. I like bands like Ween. I like Zappa. I'm all over the place. So there's people that love that kind of stuff. Yeah. They'll remix it, do reverses. It'll be like Tomorrow Never Knows with the Beatles with all the sound effects, except it just be your mumbling.
Yeah.
So how did you guys decide who
It's
sang what? What songs in 10cc was? Did
well,
you guys like have choices, or kind of just who felt like with what song? Or
it was we all had to go actually, and so
awesome.
I guess if two of us had written a song, you know, either of those two would have a crack at it.
Ah,
But how it physically worked, let's say we had a song regardless of who'd written it, each of us would go into the live room at a time and attempt to sing it. And while the other three were gathered around the control room window, and if you were good, there would be a lot of nodding going on. But if you were crap,
hmm.
they'd hold up a sign that said "next,"
Like an
and
audition.
and then that, yeah, well, that's exactly what it was,
Very cool.
for all intents and purposes. And that, then out you would go, and then the next person would come in, and they'd be subjected to the same humiliation. It was really down to who could do it best. There was no, I'm the lead guitar player, I'm the singer, I'm the drummer, there was none of that shit. It was, this voice works for this song and you can hit all the notes, so you sing it.
That's a good way to do it, because then nobody's being hurt by saying, "Hey, you can't sing this. We're auditioning everybody," and it works good as for the
No,
band dynamics too. So that's pretty cool.
yeah,
Yeah.
it worked. It worked. It was all about. It was really all about getting the best from each song, making it as good as.
Yeah.
One thing that was different, I think, about the way we used to record. I think a lot of bands at that time used to lay down all their backing tracks for, let's say 12 songs that they were doing for an album. Then they do the vocals, and then they do the overdubs, and then they'd add the strings or whatever. We never worked like that. We took a track from beginning to end.
Oh wow.
And then we moved on to another track from beginning to end, because we like to commit ourselves. If we discovered a sound halfway through the process of recording the song, we commit it to tape. We wouldn't say, okay, well, we'll remember that, make a note of it, and we'll mix it like that when it comes time. We did it, and we allowed that sound to affect what we did next on the track. We were kind of sculpting each track as a separate piece.
That's very interesting, because you always hear people, when they go into studio, it's always like, we do this, we leave, we come back, we take breaks from it, we go do other songs, and we never finish it. And then you always hear that it just keeps putting down the line. Then you hear these like, oh, it's in development hell. And it's like, it's because you went to 7 different projects instead of going back to the one you originally started. That's very interesting. It's the way a lot of times, a lot of us, the brains are like all over the place.
Well, you're right. I mean,
Yeah.
we were fearless in that regard. We didn't give a shit. There aren't hundreds of 24-track tapes lying around with various versions.
That's
of things.
true. Yeah,
Um,
it's hard to
but
find that like
it's
balance, and it's like, wow.
it is, and I think that inability to make a decision is harder today than it ever was, because you can.
Yeah, I mean, I
defer making a
stockpile all
decision.
my demos on my computer. I got I'm over here like Neil Young, just stockpiling upon stockpiling. And am I ever gonna listen to these? Maybe not, but they're there, and I can. And it's crazy that I have a home studio that I never thought I'd have. I don't have to spend money in the real studio, but I still like going in there because it's a different experience. But it's something that's nice that you could do stuff at home and demo everything at home. And if somebody likes it, they might pick it up and say, "Hey, I want you to come here and do this." But before you had to, there was that talent. You had to actually be good to get into the studio. You had to actually go through a process, which I've read.
Fun.
It's crazy. I've read up on that. And I'm speaking with Roger Joseph Manning Jr. of Jellyfish a while ago back on my show, and he brought up the fact that it's kind of took away from that factor of like having to be good. Everybody can make music now, which is it could be a good thing, but it's also kind of oversaturated too, because you don't have as much of people. You had to have money to get in, or you had to know somebody. It's now just anybody could do it from home, which is great. It's wonderful, because music is such a healing thing. But it's also you definitely have to weed out from all the stuff to find what you really like, those gems that are underneath that don't get picked up right away either.
Exactly.
Which is very interesting.
It's so different today than it used to be, because of what you're saying, and because of the technology that's available and is relatively cheap, and the recording systems that are relatively cheap and available. It's so much easier for people to do it. And you gain a lot, but you lose some things. And one thing that I think has been lost, whether it's a good thing or a bad thing, I don't know, is the space where you record or where people record also has a character, and that seems to have disappeared. You know, Motown records sounded different to records made in New York or records made in LA in different studios because of the neighborhood, because of the people, because of the social situation there. You know, now everybody's using the best drum samples.
Yep.
So everybody's using the same drum samples.
Yeah, there's no, creativity. There's creativity within the making of the sample, but the sound itself, you're like,
Yes.
I've heard those drums before. They should give a name to the drummer of the sample and be like, you're forced to use the sample drummer. Credit to this person because it's the same sound. You know, on every record, you'll start to notice that it's all the same. It's crazy. That's why I like having drummers at disposal, that I have friends that I'm like that also have home studios, and I have a drummer for my psych band, and I got a drummer for my solo pop stuff that I do, and I'm like, hey guys, I want this sound in this song. Who wants to do it? You know, who wants to grab the piece? And they love, you know, they take their time, and we each have fun with it, and it's just been such an amazing experience being able to, you know, have that ability, but also at the same time, if I use the samples, I'm usually very weary because I have a MIDI keyboard, and I'm kind of like, I wish I could have my drummer record samples into it, you know, start using his at my will. But, you know, less of an ego when you have your own, but it's nice having that extra sound from somebody else playing instruments. It's the only instrument I can't really play is drums. It's crazy. I'm fun at guitar. I'm really good at, like other things, like just writing. I'm really good at writing, so it's very fun, but I go to try to play drums and I'm like, I don't know what this is. It's like an animal to me that I don't understand, so I have such respect for drummers that can handle the beast of the drum set. It's pretty cool.
But it's funny, you know, talk to somebody about playing drums and they say, well, how do you do it? Because you're playing 4 different things at the same time. And what they don't understand is you're actually playing 4 parts of the same thing at the same time. But yeah, I get it. The thing that seems to have disappeared a little bit as well, it's become more of a lonely pursuit making music. You can effectively, on your own with a laptop, make a record. But there's a joy in working with other people, that bounce of things backward and put them forwards, but also the God-given mistake. You know, don't forget that. When you're playing with other people, someone will fuck up along the line.
And it's fun too.
Chord.
It's actually fun. It's like a challenge.
But sometimes when that happens, you get something better than what you were aiming for.
That's very true too. I remember, I had a session that we're like doing the jam band with my band, and one of our drummers dropped his sticks, and I felt like I'm leaving this in. I said, it's actually dropped in a certain beat, kind of like Screaming in the Night by Crocus, like the middle side of things. It had that bottle drop beat to it. And I was like, yo, dude, I'm leaving this in. He goes, that's fine with me. He goes, I like all that stuff. And my buddy does sampling, so he always, like, the guy that helped me with some of the questions today, his name's Owen. He helps me with a lot of he does like a lot of our remixes for our own songs. He likes doing all that stuff. And so like he'll remix, and I'm like, you're putting the drop of the stick in there, aren't you? And he goes, yep, I found it in the middle of the file. I'm like, yes. That's so cool.
Best thing you ever played.
Yeah, right. Just not even the drums. I'm sorry, Ezra. That's not your drum playing. It's the drop of the stick is the best part. You know. Yeah. I wanted to move forward to your recent solo album. I'm very fascinated by how this started, evolving other musicians as well. Okay. So your recent solo album, Muscle Memory, had quite an interesting idea behind it, recording with artists remotely that you never got to meet in person. What was the recording experience like for that?
It was fascinating. I mean, as was the writing experience. It was, you know, I'm a drummer. I'm the opposite to you by the sound of it. I'm a drummer, and that is the only instrument I can play other than singing. So if I write with people, or what I'm used to doing is sitting opposite somebody with a guitar or a keyboard, and they churn out some chords, and I react to what they're playing by singing. And if it's any good, we write it down and we remember it, you know. But this was kind of different, but the same. This was well, that was the reason I did it this way, because I need stimulus. I need to hear something in order to get my vocal juices flowing, if you forgive the expression. And,
I got you.
But what it really meant was, rather than sitting opposite somebody who was just playing one instrument, I was getting a sort of a part finished piece of music. So on the one hand, there was a discipline to it whereby and this was a conscious thing on my part, where I couldn't say, oh, we'll try a different chord there. Let's try extending this bit. Let's try losing that bit. There was a discipline to it, saying I have to work to this structure, which was helpful to me, but also the fact that there was more than one sound going on. There was in many cases a lot of instruments playing, like a finished piece of music, and both those elements together was inspiring to work with as a vocalist, and I found it quite easy. Also, I didn't have to get up and make anyone coffee every 10 minutes. There was none of that, sorry, I have to go to the toilet, or can I have a coffee, or whatever. It was a very intense period of time because I got far more tracks sent to me than I anticipated. I got about 300 and odd pieces of music sent to me of all sorts of different genres, and some you couldn't even classify.
Wow.
So it was a matter of, it was in order to select the ones I ended up working with, I had to try doing things with pretty much everything that came my way, and that was a lot of work in itself. But in the end, it was an instinctive thing. It's when I was working on something and it flowed, I stuck with it. It was as simple as that. And I found, probably because the period of time I was working in, COVID was just kind of coming in and kicking off everywhere. So it was quite a dark time. So the lyrical content that I was coming up with was different to what I'd done before. It was pushing the boat out into slightly darker waters than I'd done before. But I just went with it. I didn't, you see, when I began the project, I had no sense of what it was going to be. I just thought, well, if this is going to work, it's going to work. Don't even think about it.
Yeah, you have to just go with that gut feeling of just doing it, not worrying about what's going to happen.
Yeah.
And I think it probably gave a lot of really musicians a chance to also come out of the COVID gloom and say, hey, I'm getting to work with Kevin Godley. This is awesome. And it's also an experience to just be able to, probably for yourself as well, to get out of that gloom, like you were saying. And it's just so cool to see something like that succeed. That's probably, from all over the world too. And it's just so cool to see that. And I definitely am really enjoying the album. It's different in styles too. I enjoyed listening to it as Billy from Glass Onion sent it to me. I really enjoy it, and definitely one of the ones that inspired me a little bit to keep going too, with like how different the styles are. You don't have to always be the Beatles-esque rock group. You could bring different styles to it as well, which is very cool.
Well, I don't believe in genres. I think everyone talks about genres. Even we were talking about samples before. There are now sample packs. You can buy a sort of a sample pack of hip hop, or a sample pack of this or that and the other, or garage or drum and bass. And it's like, well, I don't want to sound like that. I don't want to know what it sounds like until there's more going on. If you know what I mean?
Yeah, you don't want to force an idea onto a song unless just letting the song flow itself. Yeah, it's more better to let the song be, because you're the creator. You're not the song in a sense. You're letting it flow through you. I've heard from David Cross of King Crimson as well, which will be released before your interview here, so it'll be related there. He even said that sometimes he feels as if the instrument isn't him, that it's just somebody's playing through him. Do you have like a similar experience with that, where you feel like the songs have created themselves in front of you, and not as much as like your first
moments? But interestingly enough, the moments are usually not when I'm sat in front of a microphone. They're when I'm out walking the dog. When I'm walking the dog or driving, and I'm not concentrating, because I find that when I'm concentrating, I'm thinking too hard. But when I'm not, when I'm sort of just singing along to something and I'm thinking about something else, there's another part of the energy that comes through, and it's a more intuitive thing. And I've come up with lots of other things, parts of the record that just came because I just let it come, and I wasn't really thinking. I was just singing along. I wasn't thinking, well, what's going to work here? Well, that word is not very good. Let's substitute it.
Hope you're enjoying the podcast so far. Kevin Godley has a lot of wisdom to share about 10cc and his new album. I wanted to play one of his new songs called Expecting a Message off his newest solo record there, which is the one we're talking about. So you can kind of feel the same feelings I felt talking with him about the songs and how unique they are and fun, that he is not genre defining.
I'm expecting a message. Is there a message for me? I'm expecting a message. Is there a message for me? I'm expecting a message from something out of this world. I'm expecting a message that I really want to hear. I was told to come here and wait for a signal. I was told to hold on to my head and cover my eyes. So I'm here and the sky's all purple and humming. I'm here and my body's changing size. I'm expecting a message. Is there a message for me? I'm expecting a message. Is there a message for me? I'm expecting a message. Is there a message for me? Your house is empty, but the pool is full. And the water's dirty. Yeah, the water's dirty. She smells like a polecat. And listen hard, you can hear her sweat. She likes to stay up till sunrise to watch the concrete set. She follows this strange religion, the move they're dead about. Preach foot and razor wire on heaven to stop souls from breaking out. Is there a message for me? Gotta let the souls break out. Is there a message? Gotta let the souls break out. Is there a message for me? Gotta let the souls break out. Is there a message? Feel the car's engine stalling. See the fallen angel falling. Vile, greasy things are crawling into me. I'm dying on a kind of table, lying in a kind of room. They're scraping out my soul in the bath of dirty water. Here comes the humming needle. Here comes the moan releasing. Where is my God when I need him? Where is my God? You gotta let the souls break out. Gotta let the souls break out. Is there a message? You gotta let the souls break out. Is there a message for me? Gotta let the souls break out. Is there a message? You gotta let the souls break out. Is there a message for me? Gotta let the souls break out. Is there a message? I'm expecting a message. Is there a message for me? I'm expecting a message, but I don't wanna hear it.
And we're back.
So thought for me isn't a particularly creative instrument. It's allowing whatever it is that makes you do this stuff to come out without thinking.
Yeah, and I've noticed that when I write too, it's usually when I'm at work, when I can't write it down, of course, but usually it's at places I get that like divine intervention
and
of
you
like,
forget it.
and then you forget it, and I'm like, that would have been a hit. And it's like you have that feeling like if I remember this ever, that's it. And if it comes back to me, I have to record it. You know, I have to stop what I'm doing. I know I've read up on Neil Young saying similar things, as if like when the music would come in, he would stop everything he was doing because he knew this was it. And it was like one of those things, and it's hard to just stop what you're doing, especially in a world where like everybody's moving so fast. And it's, for me, it's like I definitely love sitting in the studio, but there's days like I get ear tired. I didn't even realize ear fatigue is a real thing until I started doing studio work. And I'm like, wow, this song sounds like garbage. And I'm like, I'm just gonna let it sit. The next day I'm like, wow, this is amazing, because your ears are just tired. And so like I've always written, I'm very good at free versing writing. So if people send me instrumentals, I'm able to write to it. So I have a lot of fun with, working with that. But there's days I'm like, all right, I got to take a break for like 2 weeks. I got to like step away. But then there's days that I need to be in the studio just to feel better. And I was doing some research on you and Creme as well, because we'll get into the Godley and Creme stuff too. I came across a very interesting instrument, which is the gizmo. What was that about? It's very cool. And how did that come about, building that and also patenting it in 1969, right?
Right. Just going back to the very early days of Strawberry Studios. I think in those days, we were quite young, and we were at that stage in our careers where we were still, and I think a lot of artists are like this at the beginning of their writing careers. They haven't developed a character of their own yet. They haven't found their own voice. So to a degree, they're kind of copying people who they admire. And we were sort of, writing sort of sub-Beatles tracks and things. So we were kind of figuring, well, we need some strings on this. And we didn't like the sound of a mellotron. In fact, there wasn't a mellotron in Manchester. And to hire a local orchestra and an arranger to do that was a really big number, and not only expensive, but time consuming. And we don't write music. So we kind of figured, well, hang on, is there a way we could make our own string sound? I mean, a guitar is a stringed instrument, right? Why is there not a way we could kind of vibrate the strings to make it sound more like violins and cellos? And I remember this distinctly. The first experiment was an electric drill with a rubber eraser on the end of it. And I remember moving slowly towards Lol's prized Stratocaster and not attacking the strings, but sort of seeing what would happen. And it would sort of go, make some dreadful noises. But for about 5 seconds, maybe less, there was the vague hint that it might possibly work. So the idea of getting something that went round and round to vibrate the strings was the key. And we eventually found our way to the Manchester College of Science and Technology, where there was a chap there who actually built the first prototype. I think his name was John McConnell, an engineer from the engineering department, who built the first prototype of the gizmo. And that was what we always used on stage and what we used in all subsequent records. The manufactured version that came out of Musitronics, when it went on sale to the public, it was okay, but the problem with it was that the materials then didn't exist, and the technology then didn't exist to make it a very stable proposition as an instrument. It was affected by the weather, it was affected by heat, it was affected by anything, because it was an analog piece of equipment. It was almost like something that Leonardo da Vinci may have built in an age where synthesizers were just coming into vogue, which is why it was a cult thing for a while. A lot of interesting people used it. The timing was poor. And the technology was wrong. Actually, I think it's probably about 3 or 4 years ago, there's a small company in the States who started making them again.
Really? Wow.
To order. Yeah. Yeah, that's interesting, isn't it? I mean, the way
Very.
things go round.
Especially the
Come
time
full circle.
between, yeah, the amount of years between the original and then having now coming out now. It's very
Yeah,
interesting. Wow. And I know Paul McCartney's used it with Wings on I'm Carrying, I believe, and then Led Zeppelin in Through the
yeah,
Outdoor also used it. I mean, Jimmy Page was known for messing around with different kind
yeah,
of instruments. It's just funny to hear that like it
yeah,
wasn't the Mellotron, it was something completely different because everybody was like fascinated by the Mellotron at that time. I mean, King Crimson was using
yeah,
it, all these different things, and it's just so cool to see something brand new and something very
yeah.
inventive.
Oh, it was a great experience.
Yeah,
It's funny. It was one of those things that in the end, it contributed to 10cc falling apart.
really.
Well, yes, to a great degree, because after recording How Dare You, I can't remember the exact timeline, but round about then, because we'd invented this thing in 1969-ish, we hadn't really spent much time in the studio with it to see what it was capable of. We'd
Ah,
used it sporadically in 10cc, so we thought, okay, well, let's book some time, some downtime at Strawberry and mess around for a couple of weeks and see what we could do, which is exactly what we did. And we got lost in that. And we were enjoying more doing that than the thought of coming back together to do a 10cc album. And we wanted to make an album of that eventually was called Consequences, before embarking on the next 10cc album. But that didn't happen. It's such a shame, but everything sort of spiraled out of control at that point, which was a real shame.
did Godley and Cream happen right away, or was that kind of just because you guys worked together before 10cc? So was it just natural to go back together as a duo and become what you
Yeah.
became? Okay. And so what was like any of your favorite memories from Godley and Cream? This is asking a big one as well, but when that came about, was there any like favorite tour memories or favorite studio memories from that?
Yeah, Lol Creme and I, we worked together on and off for 27 years.
Oh wow,
So
yeah, there's just a lot
that
there.
goes, yeah. So a lot of silly times. The stuff I remember mostly, I mean, the Consequences period was interesting because we hid away in the studio and we became stir crazy. But we did some interesting things. But it was very indulgent looking back on it. But we wrote a song that we recorded with Sarah Vaughan that was a delight. There are hundreds of memories. Obviously, a lot of memories to do with our later career as video directors too. But the difference between us and Eric and Graham always was the fact that we kind of didn't give a shit about the career aspect of 10cc. We always felt lucky that we were in a position to make music and to keep trying to make different music. So there was never any master plan of things like, oh, well, we found our sound now, let's stick to it. So it was the opposite. Well, okay, we've done that, let's move on. Let's try something different. And I guess that's really, when you get to the heart of it, it couldn't have lasted a great deal longer because those two fundamental ways of thinking of things, both valid, by the way, both valid ways of looking at one's career. But we were sort of the mad artists who'd try any shit to see what would happen. But the others were classic songwriters who had a very clear idea of what we should be. And the two elements were kind of drifting apart by the end of How Dare You.
Very interesting, and it's very cool to see that you guys didn't stick with one sound and just kept going forward, saying, "Okay, we did that, and we're moving forward." Because it's a lot of times it's hard for artists to do that nowadays. They stick with one song, and that's it. But that's why a lot of these sounds on the radio of nowadays, they're all like, honestly, I could pick out rhythms from one song and be like, "Okay, that's in like 7 other ones," And there's, hey, that works. It works for them. That's cool. But it frustrates me as an artist trying to be an original type thing. It's very frustrating on my end. But at the same time, sometimes it's just fun to just play and just have fun with it, record and just love music for what music is. And it's so cool to see that there was bands back then doing that as well, just loving music for what music is, which is very cool. And I wanted to get into your career of music videos. I mean, this is, they credit, Mike Nesmith with starting MTV, but they got to credit you with being the most music video director ever. I love like looking at the list here of the amount of names that I recognize too, which is very cool. And I wanted to just bring up a few that I really wanted to get to know, like how the experience was behind them. And the first one, I'm a huge Beatles fan. So I wanted to ask, what was it like getting the call to do Real Love?
It was great. I mean, I'd known Paul for a long time, as you must know. Back in Strawberry Studios, we met when he was recording an album for his brother, Mike. He'd come in the evenings and record all night, and we'd record during the day, and we'd sort of swap notes and play stuff in between, he was a neighbour. He lived sort of 15 minutes away from me.
Oh, wow.
When we were living in Kent. And he said, I think they released 2 singles from that collection around about that time. They did a big documentary series, didn't they?
Yeah.
I forget. Free as a Bird was the other one, wasn't it?
Yes, that's it. Yes.
And that was a big, expensive, multi-camera, technically motivated, expensive film. And they wanted to do something that was a bit free and easier and use more archive footage from the files, but find ways to glue the stuff together. So Paul called me up, and of course it was like, Jesus, the Beatles inspired us to get into this game, and now they're asking me to do a video. What's not to like? So we talked about it, and I was given access to a hell of a lot of unseen archive material. And I came up with this idea of kind of taking the film that Yoko made of John in super slow motion, and doing the same with everybody else as a way to glue the whole thing together, and also dropping a white piano into the Mersey and reversing it to symbolise John's and sort of virtual involvement in the track. It was an amazing experience. The weird part of it was, for me, it was a bit silly really at the end, but there wasn't a great mix of the song. In fact, I think the mix that I was editing to was kind of low in level, and voices were mixed down on purpose. And I think that was because they were concerned that if it ever got out, if it somehow found its way out of the edit room into the public domain before it actually hit the shelves, no one wanted that to happen. So I couldn't hear the lyrics very well. I couldn't hear. So purely for the sake of editing properly and knowing what I was editing to, I went into a little sound studio and sang over the top of it just to make it clear for me, which was fine. But somehow that found its way out there. So it's sort of John, Paul, George, Ringo, and Kev, is out there somewhere.
That's crazy. It's like you try everything you could do. You're trying so hard. It's like when I just watched the Get Back documentary, The 8 Hours. Really enjoyed watching that. One of the things I never thought was ever going to see, and it's inspired me as a musician in tenfolds. And I just love. I'm gonna watch it again at some point, fully through again. I'm probably gonna buy it just so I never lose chance of that divine inspiration from the Beatles. And really seeing what they do. Like you were saying, like trying to keep everything quiet. Freaking Paul and John go into a room, they got the mics recording them in the room. It's like they can't even like do their own stuff just to talk. Everybody was recording everything those guys did. It was crazy.
I know. Didn't you? I mean, I remember I watched the whole thing probably over 2 days or something. And after about an hour, it was like it was happening couple of weeks ago. It wasn't like I was watching something in
it felt like it was like present. It felt really real. It was kind of cool
until the very end, where they were doing talking heads with people on the street. And it was like, oh shit. It was like the people were like from Dickens. You know, it's like,
Well, yeah, it's like he's the police officer too, like the old uniforms and everything. Because I'm
yeah.
American, so we don't see that over here at
Oh,
all. You know, this is very English from what you read about and what you hear and
oh,
everything. It's like the one guy though, he prides himself with stopping the Beatles. I'm like, dude, you're gonna go to your deathbed with like, I stopped the Beatles. Good for you. It always made me laugh so hard that like
yeah,
you
I
can't tell me it
know.
wasn't
But I
interesting
read
to
an,
him.
but it was.
Yeah.
I read an interview with him
Oh,
recently that
really?
said that's what he was supposed to do.
Yeah.
But he insisted, you know, you remember there's a bit in the film somewhere we have to go up on the roof, we have to, you know, have to talk to the boys and all that stuff. He was as starstruck as everybody else. He was thinking, shit, I am never going to get in this situation ever again. I have to get up there.
Yeah, and
That
it's
was the
like, what do you
uniform
do?
talking, you know.
What do you do? I mean, like, it's
Yeah.
like, oh god. I mean, you're face to face with all the Beatles, Mel Evans too, who's got the amazing Anvil solo, which is my favorite now.
Yeah.
Finding that out, I love Badfinger. They're my all-time favorite band, and we recently just interviewed Joey Molland on our show. Getting to talk Badfinger with him for only 12 minutes, but it was so worth it. Definitely became friends with him, and I got to meet him in person and Todd Rundgren at the same time. It was very nerve-wracking. Jason Sheff as well, too. Very cool show. They're doing that Beatles tour with Christopher Cross, and amongst Denny Lane's on that, too. And it's just very exciting. And so it's just been such a reward to have this show. And I think it's just because I'm so young and love music so much that all these guys want to come on and just have a fun time talking, which I love. But it's just so rewarding. But it's interesting to hear from Joey, like the story about how Badfinger got their name with the Beatles related, of course, but it's hearing about Mel Evans working with them as well. And it was just very interesting to see that, like, that they got to see in the pictures, like got to see in the 8-hour documentary, those are the people that literally Badfinger could have easily been in one of these sessions at one point. Like, they're just not showing, you know, it was around that time, you know, so it's crazy. And I wanted to ask you another video. I'm gonna like fast forward to 2001 here. I just looked at the list here, and one of my favorite like gothic metal bands are on here as well. Him, the video "Pretending." How was it like to work with that? I mean, much interesting video as much as I watched as well too. What was that one? The inspiration behind doing that one?
Well, it's always the same process for me to a degree. There are two criteria, and it may sound selfish, but the first criteria is, can I come up with an idea for this artist that I would like to see on screen? Okay, that's criteria one. Criteria two is, can I come up with an idea for an artist that I would like to see on screen, but also works extremely well for this piece of music? So if those two criteria are fulfilled, I'm in, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
And this particular track felt like they were moving in a particular way. And I'm very into, I'm very into finding different ways of moving things in music video. And I came up with, each of them are mounted on separate, how would I describe them? They're like rocking chairs, but they were enormous rocking chairs. But they're not chairs, they're like semicircles with a stage on the top, and people were pushing them. Obviously, you know, the singer was on one with a microphone, so you could hang on to the microphone. But that's all that's really going on. And we had the cameras mounted to these things and sometimes off these things. So you never saw them, but they gave a very individual way of looking at the way this band were moving. And kind of, I don't know, it worked extremely well for me. It was a great shoot. They were great. They took to it like ducks to water, and played with it as most good bands do, particularly a very physical band. A very physical singer in this case figured out pretty rapidly how to play with the situation I put in it. And when that happens, you know your quid's in, you know it's going to work. So yeah, that was a ball. As ever, these things are shot in a day, and you're lucky if you get anywhere near what you set out to get. But as always, there's a lot of planning going into things and discussions and people getting used to what I'm giving them to get used to. And they have to realize that I'm doing that not to humiliate them, but to give them something different to operate with in order to get something new out of them, really. That's kind of that's how I think in most situations. If I'm going to do a video for anyone, it's not really about, well, how can I make them look cosmetically beautiful? It's not really, that's not my gig. That's kind of wardrobe and makeup. I'm trying to think of a way of pouring the song into something visual that, and not in a contrived way, but in a way that hasn't been seen before quite, that adds something a little bit new and a little bit different to the way you might perceive the song.
Yeah, and it's a very way of thinking differently too, and I think it allows artists to. You never know that they're always. A lot of people focus on the one song that they're doing. It might inspire something else down the road as well, because they were inspired by that experience. Working with you and doing the music video as well, which is very cool.
What we did a video for Little Steven, for his anti-apartheid thing. And what was the track called? Ain't Gonna Play Sun City was the track. Which was very exciting. They'd already shot a lot of great stuff with, like Springsteen and Bono and goodness knows who else. But whoever was directing it at the time couldn't finish it off, so they gave it to us to edit. So that was a cool one to do. Ain't Gonna Play Sun City.
And then there's one that you just did that just dropped today too, with the lead singer of the Charlatans, Tim Burgess. Which Here Comes the Weekend. That's the one I really did want to ask about as well, because Billy gave me the nod on it, and I was like, oh, it's just released today. Hell yeah! So what was the idea for that one? It's very different from the Charlatan stuff. Tim's solo career is very unique, and I like it. So what came about working with Tim and getting that video done?
It was, I guess it was it was the sound that I found. It was a very kind of spirited track, but he's essentially, it's a weird thing because the lyric is talking about we're kind of going to get together, but like over the phone or whatever. We're not really going to get together, but that's fine because we cannot be together really. And he seemed okay with that, but elsewhere in the song he doesn't sound that convinced that he's okay about it. So I don't know. I was kind of looking for a way, without being too overt about it, that was about it was about physical separation, but kind of virtual connection. So it was using. I was combining live action with projected action. Projected action, a sort of, I suppose it's a sort of exaggerated version of what we do with Zoom. But I wasn't thinking about it in that detail. I just knew that if I equipped myself with a digital laser projector, we could shoot members of the band separately or together, project them on a large surface, and then have a live version of each of them or all together or whatever over the top of it, film that again and project it again and mess around with those parameters. And that's kind of all it was. There was nothing really. I mean, it's indicative of the way I work in many regards. I like the experience of making film or music film to be as much like making music as possible, which means that you have to be in the moment. And if something happens that you weren't expecting that could be better than what you were aiming to achieve, then do that instead. In other words, don't pin it down too much. Don't go in with a strict storyboard. Just gather some interesting shit. And that was one of those shoots. Respond to what happens.
It's like actually like in like free versing lyrics, but it's free versing with what's responding to what's happening like within the video. That's very cool. Yeah. And that's like a lot of leagues of like the big movie directors.
Well, I think, if you're a big movie director, you understand what you're doing, but there's a lot more at stake when you're doing a big movie. With something like this, there's a lot at stake for the artist, obviously. So the artist has to trust who he's working with. And we have a good relationship because I did 2 videos for the Charlatans a good while ago.
Yeah,
2001.
Forever and the other one. I know Forever was one of them. It's one of my favorite Charlatan songs as well.
Yeah.
Which was very cool.
The other one was A Man Needs to Be Told.
That's right.
Was the other
Great
one.
song too. Wow. And it's just so cool. And you also worked with Blur too. There's so many here, so many names that are under, and definitely we'll be adding. That's going to be the main, the new album. And then you guys have a retrospective coming out of your earlier careers too. I was told the pre-orders are just up now.
Oh,
so that was very cool to hear.
Yeah.
Right, today's just been like a blessing of like you're interviewing Kevin and everything's coming up front. I'm like, very cool. So what came apart with that? What's that about?
I don't know. I got a call from Cherry Red Records. They got a sort of, they tapped into this sort of wellspring of really early recordings that we'd made. It must have been mid 60s, just after. You remember before I said when we were at art college, we left art college and we went straight to London to a recording session. This was the recording session that we went to.
Oh wow!
It was early songs that we'd been writing. We were kind of discovered by Giorgio Gomelsky. Don't know if that name rings a bell. He started this thing called the Marmalade label. He discovered the Rolling Stones.
Ooh.
That sort of whole thing, that era. And we were sort of went down to, I think it was Advision Studios in London, and recorded a couple of our tracks that appeared on a thing called the Marmalade Sampler. And then we recorded some more that was gonna be an album by us, but we were called Frabjoy and the Runcible Spoon.
Ooh, I like that name.
Which,
that's awesome.
It doesn't exactly trip off the tongue.
No, that's not one of those like, hey, what are you listening to? You know?
Forget it. It's too long. So it's a selection of stuff that we did for those sessions, but it's also demo stuff. There's maybe 2 or 3 songs that we did demos of at Graham Gouldman's house on his Revox. So it's his really old stuff from sort of back at the art college days. It's 2 art students fucking about, making noises because we felt we could make some music, and we didn't know what we were doing, but we sort of did.
And it led to such an incredible career after that, which is such fun to watch, and an honor to have you on today. I really, really thank you for coming on. And I love having a long podcast, nice long ones, and getting a good chat in that you could grab your tea or your coffee and just drink and have a morning, listen to it. So I'll be having this out for you real soon. All right, you survived this long. You stayed the whole podcast. Thank you so much. Just check out our merch over at robojackrecords.com. There's a couple unlikely places options there as well. Support us that way. That's the only way we make money from this show. We don't really make much from posting. We just do it for the love of it. But if you want to buy a t-shirt and spout your favorite podcast, Unlikely Places, you can. robojackrecords.com. Plug in.
You're tuned into Mad Wasp Radio, so don't forget where you are. Don't change that dial, you don't need to anyway.